Last week we explored the story of the call of Samuel as God's prophet and the last judge of Israel. Remember, the judges were a group of men and women who were appointed by God to lead the people of Israel. Moses had led the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt and into the Promised Land. But Moses didn't accompany them actually into the Promised Land. That task fell upon his successor Joshua. And under Joshua, the people of Israel systematically entrenched themselves as a force and as a presence in the land of Canaan. But they were always constantly at war with other nations, like the Philistines, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Assyrians, among others. And so when Joshua died, Israel then was ruled by a series of people called judges. People like Deborah and Gideon and Samson, among others. Samuel was the last of the judges. Although he had named his two sons judges over Israel, Joel and Abijah, however, turned out to be anything but just. They were corrupt, seeking only their personal gain rather than the well-being of the people. So the elders of Israel came to Samuel and said to him, "You're old, and your sons don't follow in your ways. So appoint for us then a king to govern us like the other nations around us." Samuel was upset that the people had asked for a king, and he relayed his dismay to God. But the Lord told Samuel that the people actually weren't rejecting Samuel, but rather that they were rejecting him, God himself, from being king over them. Though the Lord had brought them out of Egypt, though the Lord had provided for them in the wilderness, though God had been with them in their entry into Canaan, still the people of God had wandering eyes, looking with envy upon what the other nations had, and became more and more oblivious to the special relationship that God had desired for God's own people. So God told Samuel to spell out the price that people would pay if they really were to have a king over them. That the king would take their sons and daughters from their families to serve the desires of the king. That the king would take their best fields and vineyards and orchards for his use and for his gain. That the king would take a portion of all that the people would earn, all the grain and all the fruit, all the flocks and all their slaves. In effect, God warned the people of Israel that they would be returning to a form of slavery, to a form of bondage that they had left behind in the Exodus from Egypt. But the people were undeterred. They refused to listen to Samuel, and they refused to listen to the Lord. "We want a king," they said. "We want a king so that we can be like all the other nations." And eventually the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people and give them a king. Give them what they want." Have you ever wanted something so badly that nothing could derail your focus on getting what you wanted? Maybe it was a job. I'm going to get that job. That's what I'm aiming for. Maybe it was a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Maybe it was a house, a car, something, some status, some accomplishment or achievement. It could be any number of things. But maybe you found out that getting what you wanted wasn't everything that you thought it was going to be. Maybe that job that you wanted came with unreal expectations or a dysfunctional staff. Maybe that perfect boy or girl turned out to be just as flawed as everyone else and twice as hard to please. Maybe you got into that exclusive club or were accepted into a particular social circle, but you found out that it wasn't what you expected and the costs were just not worth it. Back when Bill Gates was still the world's richest man, you know who it is now? It's Amazon's Jeff Bezos. He's worth $140 billion. But back when Gates was still the world's richest man, someone asked him, "What do you think about being the world's richest man?" His answer was, "I wish I wasn't. I wish I wasn't. There's nothing good that comes out of that." You know, Bill Gates has done a lot of good things, philanthropically. But maybe you can understand what he was getting at. Right? Put yourself in that position. You might think, well, wouldn't it be great? But if you think about it, I think his answer makes a lot of sense. I wish I wasn't. There's nothing good that comes out of that. Remember, today was the French Open men's final. I won't ruin who won, for those of you who don't know who won. Pretty obvious, don't you think? But Remember the tennis great Andre Agassi? He wrote in his biography that after he finally won at Wimbledon, people were forced to reassess him in light of his victory there. They thought he could never win at Wimbledon, but he finally did. But in his autobiography, he wrote, "I felt no difference, that winning didn't change things for him at all. A win didn't feel as good as a loss felt bad. He thought that reaching the pinnacle would bring him some sort of satisfaction, but it didn't. It's a lie," he wrote. "It's a lie. That isn't at all what I feel. I'm the number one tennis player on earth, and yet I feel empty. And if being number one feels empty, unsatisfied, then what's the point? What's the point?" Sadly, this past week, we heard the tragic news of two high-profile celebrities, the designer Kate Spade and the chef and storyteller Anthony Bourdain, who, from all appearances on the outside, appeared to have everything that you would want in life, right? They had fame, they had recognition, they had fortune, they had wealth beyond their wildest imaginations, but on the inside, they must have suffered from something that they truly needed. They must have suffered from something that they truly needed that they lacked. And we don't really know enough about what happened to really fully comment on this. And the reality of depression and mental health challenges is something that affects far more people than we realize or admit. But I think it would be fair to say that if Kate Spade or Anthony Bourdain had gotten what they truly needed, they would probably still be with us. It's not just individuals who realize that getting what you want isn't what you need. Corporations, organizations, nations, churches come to appreciate that many choices don't always end up creating the desired outcomes. Remember a guy named John Scully? John Scully? He was the CEO of Pepsi when Apple Computer hired him away from Pepsi. Ended up paying him the highest salary for a Silicon Valley CEO. And what was John Scully's lasting achievement at Apple? Getting rid of Steve Jobs for 10 years. Gerald Levine was CEO of Time Warner, a media giant. He desperately wanted to have a presence in the growing online market. So Levine sought out and ultimately brokered a merger between two giants, Time Warner and AOL, right, America Online, at the very, very height of the dot-com bubble back in early 2000s. He finally got that done, and then the bursting of that bubble led to a $200 billion loss for shareholders. Getting what you think you want isn't always what you truly need. The Israelites wanted a king of their own. God told them, "You don't need a king." But the people wouldn't listen. They looked around, they saw other nations with kings, other nations that seemed more powerful. They longed to be like the other nations around them, longing to be relevant to the world, which always runs the risk of becoming irrelevant to God. And it would only be a short time before the people of Israel would rue their decision for a king. Saul would be their first king, and he would live up or live down to all the warnings that God had predicted. Now let's say you've got a son or a daughter that has their mind set on something you know would be harmful for them. But they won't be dissuaded, they won't be denied. As a parent, you've got a couple of choices, right? You can forbid them to pursue their desire. "No, I won't let you do it," causing a rift to grow between you and your son or your daughter. Or you can tell them, "Look, if you insist on following this destructive pattern of choices, I'm not going to stop you from doing it. But don't expect me to be there to pick up the pieces when it all comes crashing down." And in fact, that's exactly what God said to the people of Israel. "In that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you've chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." Yet I sense that the words God spoke were spoken with deep sadness, and that these are not the final words, because the God who loves us is an amazingly patient and merciful God. God allows us to reject him. God does not resist it. God does not argue. God does not rage. And God does not retaliate. There is perhaps a wistfulness and a very, very deep sadness, but God doesn't reject us. And I think this is really the point of the whole story. Rejection is not the story of God's relationship with humanity. Rejection is not the story of God's relationship with us. It wasn't when Saul proved to be a disastrous king. God didn't just wash his hands of humanity and say, I told you so. Didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you? Too bad you're stuck with him. Instead, God led Samuel to a man after God's own heart. David, who as flawed as he was, and he was deeply flawed, was still the greatest king that Israel ever had. And this is good news for us. This is good news for us. Because like the Israelites of old, we have wandering eyes, don't we? We have eyes looking around us, seeing everything that other people have, forgetting that we've been called into a special relationship with God, a relationship that's rich in love and compassion, mercy and healing, a relationship that offers us a peace that the world cannot understand. And yet too often we want to be just like everybody else. We want what the world has, forgetting that God has called us to be his own people. You know, as a parent, there is another choice, right? It's not, you can't do it, or I told you so. There's another choice. We can't forbid our children from making their own choices. As the father of a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, I can tell you that this is a growing realization for me. We can't forbid our children from making their own choices, especially when they're convinced that it's what they want. Even when we know it's not what they need. But we don't have to wash our hands of it when things go wrong either. As a parent, as someone who loves their child, there's always another option. The option is to be there when it all goes wrong. The option is to be there when it all goes wrong. It's to be patient. It's to be compassionate. It's to be a loving presence that says, it's all right. It's all right. I'm still here. It's all right. I'm still here. We'll start again, and this time we'll make a different choice. You probably know, those of you who are parents and those of you who have had parents, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You watched as a child chooses a particular path in life or a particular relationship, maybe something that you haven't always approved of. But you've said your piece, right? You've said your piece, and now all you can do is be supportive. And when the inevitable happens and the relationship fails or the career path kind of bottoms out and your child comes to you, you don't push them away saying, sorry, I told you so. You hold them. You help them to heal. And you say, it's all right. We'll make it through together and we'll find another path. We'll find another path. You know, if we as parents can do that for our children, imagine how much more God will do that. How much more will God do for us, God's own children? God knows what we want, that we want what we want, and nothing God says will dissuade us or deter us from wanting what we want. We choose to be slaves to other kings, convincing ourselves that this is what we want. And God, in God's love, won't force us to love him, but God, in God's love, won't walk away from us either. It's like the father of that prodigal in the parable Jesus tells, who gives his younger son everything that the son thinks he wants, and then goes out every morning down the street, waiting, looking for his son to return, not so that he can say, I told you so, but so that he can say, I love you, and we can start again. I love you, and we can start again. I don't know where you are this morning. Maybe you're like the Israelites in Samuel's time. You've looked around, and you've chosen another path. You've chosen to make something other than God the king of your life. And maybe you've come to that sobering realization that getting what you want isn't really what you need. You won your Wimbledon, and you've discovered that it's empty. You've achieved that career goal, and it hasn't brought you the satisfaction that you think it would, that you thought it would. Your family, your house, your car, your job, your bank account still doesn't make up for that nagging sense that something's missing, that something is missing. Augustine, the African bishop and saint, wrote of God, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." And Pascal, the French philosopher and mathematician, wrote of a God-shaped hole in the human heart that people in vain try to fill with something, seeking things that are not there to help to fill that hole. But they can't find it, because this abyss, this hole can only be filled by God himself. When we finally come to that conclusion, we find that God is way ahead of us, not walking away from us, not abandoning us, but waiting for us, waiting patiently for us. God in Jesus Christ is the one who doesn't say, "No, you can't do that," who doesn't walk away saying, "Well, if you do it, I don't care anymore." God in Jesus Christ is the one who patiently waits for us, as a loving mother, as a caring father, saying to us, "Don't you know I love you?" And we can start again. We can start again. This is what the table before us signifies this morning. This table, the bread and the cup, the body and the blood of Christ, symbolize the love and mercy of God. To eat of the bread and to drink of the cup is to know again and again and again the deep and wide mercy and grace of God's love that says, "It's okay. I love you. We can start again. We can start again." It doesn't matter what sort of hash we may have made of our lives, how far we may have wandered from chasing other kings. God's mercy and God's goodness far outlasts our capacity for foolishness and folly. And over the next few weeks, over the summer, as we travel through the story of the kings of Israel, we will see that foolishness and folly played out over and over again, but God's mercy and God's grace still being there. In Jesus Christ, God's only Son, friends, God has provided for us the King of Kings, the only King that we need in our lives, the one who will always love us, who promises to redeem us, renew us, and restore us. Jesus is what we need, so may we get what we truly need. Thanks be to God. Amen.